August Rennick owned half of Cottonwood County, and it cost him one sentence to make my dead husband's seed worthless. I watched him do it. I stood close enough to see the gray in his mustache and the shine on his boots. He rolled a single head of my wheat between his thumb and finger, slow, like a man appraising a horse he already meant to buy cheap. Clean wheat, the best I ever grew. Then he let it drop in the dirt and stepped past it. I didn't argue. I picked it up. That was the small day. The big day came at the spring seed market in the Ransom Grange Hall with 41 farmers standing between me and the door. I counted them later when I couldn't sleep. 41 men I'd known my whole life. And August Rennick said, loud enough to carry to the back wall, in Cottonwood County, "Ma'am, my word is the market. And I say your seed is dirty." The buyers closed their books. My price fell from $1.90 a bushel to feed grain, 24 cents. On a woman's whole year. That night, by the lamp, I read the Kansas seed law all the way through. And I found the one line August Rennick had forgotten to read. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before I go on, if that's you, if you're the kind who reads the whole page, do me a small thing. Subscribe, so you don't lose the rest of this. And comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far a widow's wheat can travel. Then come back and sit with me, because I want to tell it slow, the way it happened. My name is Della Hargrove. I'm 47 years old. I grow seed wheat on 160 acres of spring-fed bottomland 2 miles east of Ransom, and in the summer of 1934, that piece of ground was the only place for miles where the dirt stayed put. You have to understand what that year was. The dust came in on a brown wind and it didn't leave. It buried fence posts. It sifted under the doors and under the windowsills no matter how many wet rags you laid down. Men who'd farmed all their lives stood in their own fields and watched the topsoil lift up and walk off to Oklahoma. The wheat came up thin, or it didn't come up at all. Whole sections that used to green over in April lay bare and cracked, and the banks had paper on most of them. But my husband's wheat came up. Emmett bred it. That's the part folks forgot when it suited them to forget. He came home from the war in France with one good lung and a set of hands that never stopped moving, and while other men were trying to get rich quick, he spent 12 years crossing and selecting and culling one line of turkey red. He wanted a wheat that would root deep and hold on. A wheat that would germinate when the ground was mean and dry. He kept notebooks. He kept the best heads back every harvest and threshed them separate and planted them in a little block behind the barn where he could watch them like a mother watches a sick room. By the end he had it. Hargrove Turkey Red. It didn't blow away. It came up 99 times out of 100. In a wet year, it was only a little better than the county's ordinary seed. But 1934 wasn't a wet year. In 1934, my late husband's 12 years of patience were the difference between a crop and a coffin, and every farmer for 3 counties knew it, whether they'd say so in daylight or not. Emmett didn't live to see the drought prove him right. He died 2 winters back, in February, coughing that lung out a little more each night until one morning he didn't cough at all. I buried him on the rise above the creek where he could hear the water. Then I ran the farm alone. With Ruth. Ruth is my daughter. She was 16 that summer, all elbows and opinions, with her father's straight look and none of his patience. She wanted the world set right, and she wanted it set right by noon. So there we were. Me and Ruth and 500 bushels of certified seed wheat in sealed lots in the granary. The cleanest, highest germinating seed for 3 counties, and a $940 note at the Cottonwood Farmers and Merchants Bank coming due in 31 days. $940. I could pay it easy. That was the thing. The math was simple, and it was good. 500 bushels at $1.90 a bushel, which was the fair price for certified seed in a year when nobody else had any, came to $950. Sell the seed at the spring market, walk the money to the bank, clear the note, keep the ground. Keep the spring. Keep Emmett's 12 years alive for one more planting. I want you to hold on to that shelf over the stove for a minute, because I didn't think much of it at the time. There was a tin up there. Emmett soldered it himself out of an old lard can, folded the seams and ran the iron along them so it sealed tight against damp. His foundation stock lived in that tin, the purest heart of the whole line, the seed he saved back to grow the seed that grew the seed. He'd penciled a tag and wired it to the handle. Hargrove TR, keep, just that. It sat up there next to the coffee, and the matches like any old can a body might keep string in. I dusted around it. That's about all the mind I gave it. The first day, the small day, came in late April. I was in the yard when I heard the automobile. Nobody I knew drove out to my place in a motor car. Rennick did. He came up the lane slow to keep the dust down off his own machine, and he got out and stood by the fender with his hat in his hand, being neighborly. Which was how I knew there was nothing neighborly coming. August Rennick was 58 then. A big man gone a little soft, with a gold watch chain and the kind of easy voice that men use when they've never once in their lives been told no and meant it. He owned land in every township. He sat on the bank board, he held paper on half the county and grudges on the other half, and he was used to the sound of his own opinions settling a thing. "Della," he said. "Fine-looking wheat you've got standing." "Emmett's wheat," I said. "Emmett's gone," he said. "Gentle as you please. And it's a hard year to be a woman alone on good water." He turned and looked out over my bottomland like a man measuring for curtains. "I'll do you a kindness. $6 an acre, cash, and you don't have to fret about that banknote or that market or any of it. You could go into town. Take a room. Let somebody else break their back on it. $6 an acre." I knew what the ground was worth. Everybody knew what it was worth. In a drought, with a spring that never quit. It was worth 18, 20 an acre, and he was offering 6. And he was calling it a kindness. He knew I knew. That was the part that told me what kind of man I was dealing with. He didn't even bother to make the lie a good one. He just laid it down and smiled and waited for the year to do his arguing for him. "No," I said. He looked at me a long moment. Then he reached out and took a head of wheat off the stalk by the fence, a good head, plump, the awns bright. And he rolled it between his thumb and finger, rolled it slow. And he dropped it in the dirt. "Land finds its level, Della," he said. "So does a widow." He got in his motor car and drove off, careful of the dust. I stood there. Ruth came out on the porch and asked what he wanted, and I told her nothing. He wanted nothing. Then I bent down and I picked that head of wheat up out of the dirt and I brushed it off and I put it in my apron pocket. I don't know why. It seemed like a thing that shouldn't be left lying there. That was offense 1, though I didn't have a number for it yet. That was him being small in my own yard where only I could see it. The second one I didn't see. I heard about it after, from the man who was standing right there, and by then it had already done its work. There's a grain elevator in Ransom, a tall gray thing by the railroad, and Tom Aldous ran it. Tom's a square, quiet man, not quick, but he doesn't forget a thing he hears, and he heard this one. He told me weeks later, sitting at my kitchen table turning his hat around in his hands, ashamed he hadn't spoken sooner. Rennick had come by the elevator. Coy Pruitt was there. Pruitt was the regional seed buyer, the man who traveled the county with a checkbook and a scale and set the price for half the sales that got made. He was the man you had to have on your side to move seed in any quantity. And Rennick got him off to the side, friendly, and said low, "I'd steer wide of the Hargrove seed this year, Coy. Heard it carries the smut." That's all. 7 or 8 words. Heard it carries the smut. Smut is a disease. It's a fungus that gets into the head of the wheat and turns the kernels to a black, greasy dust that smells like something dead. A little of it and your grade drops. Enough of it and the whole lot's condemned. You can't sell it for seed. You can't sell it for flour. Sometimes you can't even give it away for feed because it'll foul a whole bin. For a seed grower, smut isn't a problem. It's a death sentence. One word of it, believed, and your reputation is done. Because who's going to gamble their own planting on seed that might carry a plague? Emmett's seed never had a speck of it in 12 years. He was cleaner than any man in the county about it, treated his seed, kept his bins swept, culled anything that looked off. My wheat was clean. I'd have sworn it on his grave. But Rennick didn't say my seed had smut. That's the thing I want you to notice, because it's the thing that made him dangerous. He said heard it carries the smut. Heard it. He never claimed it. He just set the word loose in Coy Pruitt's ear, where it could grow in the dark, and he walked off clean. And here's the question that opened up in my mind, later, when I had time to think, the question I couldn't put down. Why? Why does a man who owns half of Cottonwood County, who holds more land than he can walk in a week, spend 1 ounce of himself ruining a widow's 160 acres? He didn't need my ground. He didn't need the money. But it was a drought. And my 160 acres had the one spring in the township that never quit. He didn't want my wheat. He wanted my water. And he'd figured a cheaper way to get it than paying for it. The public day came 3 weeks later. The spring seed market. Every year the county holds it in the Ransom Grange Hall, a big plank building with a plank floor and long tables set up down the middle. Growers bring samples of their seed in cloth sacks, and buyers walk the tables and open the sacks and run the seed through their fingers and dicker on price, and a year's living gets decided in an afternoon. It's the one day the whole thing comes to a point. I brought samples from 3 of my sealed lots. I'd cleaned them and treated them, and I knew they were good. I set up at the far table, and I stood behind my sacks in my good dress, with my hands folded, and I waited. And I let myself think, God forgive me, that the math was going to hold. 500 bushels. $1.90. The note cleared. The ground kept. For the first hour it looked like it might. A few of the smaller men came by and looked and nodded and said they'd be back. That's how it goes early. Nobody wants to be first. Everybody wants to see what Pruitt does. Because Pruitt sets the water level and the rest of the fish swim to it. So I waited for Pruitt, and I watched Pruitt work his way down the tables, and I watched him get close. And I watched something I didn't understand pass over his face when he saw it was my table next. He didn't come to my table. He went around it. He crossed to the other side and started up the far row, and he wouldn't meet my eye. I should have known then. But I still didn't know how it was going to be done. Rennick did it himself. He was there. He was always there. He was on the fair board too. Of course he was. And he came down the middle of the hall in no hurry, with 2 or 3 men trailing him the way men trail a fellow who might do them a favor. And he stopped at my table. And he picked up a handful of my seed out of the open sack and he let it run through his fingers back into the sack. Slow. And then he raised his voice. He didn't lean in and whisper. That was the cruelty of it and the arrogance of it both. He turned so the whole hall could hear. In Cottonwood County, ma'am, he said, my word is the market. And I say your seed is dirty. He wiped his hand on his trousers like he'd touched something foul. You'll not sow smut on this county's account. The hall went quiet. You could hear the flies. And Coy Pruitt, who was standing there with the rest, reached over and took a single head of wheat off the top of my sack. I keep a few whole heads on top so a buyer can see the kernel set, and he looked at it and he dropped it on the floor. On the plank floor, in the dirt and the chaff and the boot prints. Same as Rennick in my yard. Like they'd rehearsed it, though I don't believe they had. I believe Pruitt just knew which way the wind blew and bent to it. The books closed. All down the tables, I heard them close. A ledger has a sound when a man shuts it and decides not to buy from you, a soft flat clap, and I heard it happen 41 times, or it felt like 41 times, though not every man there had a book. Somebody offered me 24 cents. Feed grain price. Not for seed. Nobody would touch it for seed now. But as animal feed, ground up, gone, 12 years of Emmett's life run through a hammer mill and fed to hogs. 24 cents a bushel. $1.90 on the walk in, 24 cents on the walk out, and one sentence in between. I want to tell you I said something. I've said 100 things since, lying awake. In every one of them I'm magnificent. I put him in his place. The hall gasps. But I'll tell you the truth because I promised you the truth. I didn't say a word. I bent down. I picked the head of wheat up off the floor. I brushed the dirt off it, the same as I'd done in my own yard 3 weeks before. I put it in the sack. I tied the sacks shut, all 3, and I gathered them up in my arms, and I walked out of that Grange hall with my back straight and my chin level and 41 men watching me go, and I did not let one of them see my face change. I got out to the wagon, and I set the sacks in the bed, and I climbed up and I drove out of Ransom, and I was 2 miles down the road, past the last house, before I let go. And then I let go all the way, out loud, alone, the horse's ears twitching back at me. When I got home, my face was dried salt and dust, and Ruth took one look and knew. Now let me tell you about the ledger, because this is where it stops being about a bad afternoon. 24 cents a bushel on 500 bushels is $120. The note is $940. You don't need my lamp and my pencil to see the size of that hole. Even if I sold every bushel for feed, and feed buyers had their pick that year, they weren't in a hurry to bid a widow up. I'd bring maybe $120 against $940 due in barely 3 weeks. I went to the bank. I put on the good dress again, and I went in and I sat across the desk from Halbert Doss, the cashier, a soft man with soft hands who wore his part combed dead straight and kept his voice at a funeral hush. Doss was Rennick's man. I didn't know how much Rennick's man he was yet, but I knew which way he leaned. The way you know which way a tree leans before it falls. I asked him for time. 30 days more. 60. I told him the seed was clean, that there'd been a slander, that I'd sell yet and clear the note if he'd just hold off the auction. Doss folded his soft hands on the desk and told me the note was firm. Those were his words. The note is firm, Mrs. Hargrove due in 26 days, and the board can't be seen to make exceptions, times being what they are. He was sorry. He looked about as sorry as a cat looks at a bird. And walking out of that bank, I finally saw the whole shape of it, the thing that had been just an outline before. Rennick didn't want to buy my ground for $6 an acre. He'd tried that, and I'd said no. So he'd found a way to get it for nothing. Kill my sale with a lie. Let the note come due on a widow who couldn't pay it. Let the bank, his board, foreclose, and then let my 160 acres, spring and all, go up at auction in a year when nobody else had cash to bid, and buy it for the price of the debt. $940 for land worth $3,000, and the only reliable water in the township thrown in. He wasn't insulting me. That was the mistake I'd made, taking it personal. It was never personal. It was just cheaper than the honest price, and August Rennick never in his life paid an honest price when a cheaper one laid a hand. Ruth wanted war. She was 16, and she loved me, and she'd watched me come home from that Grange hall with my face like a wrung rag, and she couldn't stand it. She wanted me to go door to door. She wanted me to stand up in church and call Rennick a liar to his face. She said, "Mama, everybody knows the seed's clean. They've bought it for years. Why won't you just say so? Why won't you make them say so?" And I didn't have a good answer for her. Because saying so was exactly the trap. If I went around swearing my seed was clean, I was just a widow's word against the richest man in the county's word, and in Cottonwood County in 1934 those 2 words did not weigh the same on any scale that mattered. The more I insisted, the guiltier I'd look. That's how a smear works. It doesn't have to be proved. It only has to be repeated, and the one it lands on can't wash it off by rubbing, she only grinds it in. Ruth took my quiet for surrender. I saw her decide it. I saw my own daughter look at me and think her mother had folded, and there wasn't a thing I could say that wouldn't sound like more folding. So I let her think it. That's a hard thing, letting your child believe you've given up. I put it in the drawer with the other hard things, and I went and did what I do when the world's too much, which is work. I want to be honest about my blind spot, because you've maybe already spotted it. I believed, deep down, that a lie couldn't outrun the truth forever. I believed if I just kept my head and kept my seed and kept my dignity, the truth would come around on its own and set me right. Because it always had. That belief is a comfortable one, and it is mostly wrong. A lie is faster than the truth every time. The truth is slow. The truth has to get dressed and find its papers. And while it's doing that, the lie has already been to town and back and told everybody. I waited too long trusting the truth to walk on its own legs. What I finally learned was that the truth doesn't walk. You have to carry it. And you have to know where the road is. The road was in a book. It was the night after the bank. I couldn't sleep, I hadn't slept right since the market, and I got up and lit the lamp at the kitchen table so I wouldn't wake Ruth. And there on the shelf under Emmett's tin was a stack of his things I'd never gone all the way through. His war papers, his notebooks, and a thin-bound pamphlet, gray, gone soft at the corners from handling, that said on the front the seed laws of the state of Kansas. Emmett had it because Emmett was a certified grower. To sell seed as certified, to put that word on a sack and charge the price it commands, you have to satisfy the state, and Emmett had done it, year on year. Because he was proud of his wheat, and he wanted the paper to say what he knew. He'd read that pamphlet the way some men read scripture. I could see where his thumb had worn the edges. I'd never read it. It was law, and law was a thing that happened to other people, in courthouses run by men like Rennick. But I was out of other ideas. So I sat down at my own kitchen table at 2 a.m, and I read the seed laws of the state of Kansas, front to back, every dry line of it, moving my finger under the words the way I hadn't since I was a girl. And I found it. Section by section, it was mostly rules for sellers and penalties and definitions, and then there was a paragraph, plain as a fence post, that I read 3 times to be sure I had it right. Any grower, it said, might submit a sample of seed to the State Seed Laboratory at the Agricultural College for official analysis of germination and disease. The sample had to be drawn and sealed and witnessed in the manner prescribed, to keep it honest, so no man could send in his neighbor's good seed and claim it for his own. And the certificate the laboratory issued, this is the line I read 3 times, was an official finding of the state of Kansas, admissible and recognized as such. The state of Kansas. Not Della Hargrove's word. Not August Rennick's word. The state's own word. In writing, over the signature of an analyst who'd never heard of either one of us and didn't care who owned what. The fee was $9. I had $9. The turnaround was up to 21 days. I sat there with the lamp guttering, and I felt something come up in my chest that I hadn't felt since Emmett died, and it took me a minute to name it because it had been so long. It was hope, but it was harder than hope. It was a plan. Here was a man who owned half the county and sat on the bank board and set the market with his word, and he had never once had to read a law in his life. Because he was the law where he stood. And in his whole scheme, in all his figuring, he had left out one thing. He had never imagined that there was an office in this state that outranked him. A plain government laboratory full of men in aprons who would test my seed for $9 and would not know or care that he was August Rennick. And whose finding would sit above his in the eyes of anyone who could read. He forgot to read the fine print. Because he'd never in his life had to, and I had just read it for him. I didn't wake Ruth. I wanted to hold it a day, be sure. But I sat up the rest of that night making the thing real in my mind, walking every step of it, because I knew there'd be no second try. Rennick had 26 days to my 21, and no room in it for a mistake. In the morning I hitched up and drove to town, and I telephoned the county extension agent from the store, Warren Kessler. Kessler was young, not 30. A college boy the state sent out to teach farmers things farmers mostly already knew, which made him the butt of some jokes. But he was earnest, and he was straight. And, most of all, he was official. He had the standing to draw and seal a sample the way the law wanted it drawn and sealed, so that no man could say later it had been tampered with. I told him what I meant to do. There was a silence on the line, and then he said, "Mrs. Hargrove, I've been sick about that market. Half the men there have bought your husband's seed for years, and they all knew better. Yes, I'll do it, and I'll do it right." And something in the way he said it right told me he understood exactly what right had to mean, that it had to be a chain nobody could break. We set it for the next morning. And I did one more thing. One thing the law didn't require but that I'd thought about all night. And it's the thing I'm proudest of, and it's the thing that mattered most in the end, though I couldn't have known that yet. I asked Kessler to bring the postmaster too. The postmaster in Ransom was a fixture, a fair old man everyone trusted, the kind of witness whose say-so nobody in the county would dispute. I wanted 2 witnesses to the sealing. Not one, but I also wanted a witness to something else. Before the sealing, in front of both of them, I meant to serve August Rennick a notice. They came at 8. Kessler in his clean collar with a satchel of forms and lead seals, and the postmaster, and the 3 of us stood in my granary in the smell of clean wheat and dust motes turning in the doorlight. And I took Emmett's tin down from the shelf. That was the second time that tin came down in this story, and this time I gave it all the mind in the world. I want you to see it. A hand-soldered lard can, the seams run smooth with iron, the penciled tag on its wire, Hargrove Tr. Keep, Emmett's hand. 12 years of his patience sealed up against the damp. It held the foundation stock, the mother seed, the purest heart of the whole line. The very seed the 500 bushels had descended from. If anything I owned was clean, this was clean. And it was fitting. It felt like his hands still on the place, that when the state of Kansas reached in to test the truth of my husband's life's work, it would reach into the tin he'd made with his own hands. Kessler drew the sample the way the law prescribed. He watched me pry the lid. He took the seed himself, from down in the lot, not off the top, so nobody could say I'd salted it. He poured it into a cloth envelope and folded it and ran a lead seal onto the fold and pressed his die into the lead. The postmaster signed. Kessler signed. I signed. The date went on it. The chain was made, link by link, and every link had 2 honest men's names on it. Then, before I sealed the day, I did the other thing. I'd written it out the night before, in my plainest hand. A notice. It said that I, Della Hargrove, held the accusation that my seed carried smut to be false. That I had that day submitted a sealed and witnessed sample to the State Seed Laboratory for official test, and that I invited Mr. August Rennick to test the seed himself by any means he chose, and demanded that when the state's finding came, he make his retraction as public as his accusation had been. I had made a copy. I meant for Kessler and the postmaster to witness that I served it. We drove to Rennick's. He kept a big white house in town with a porch across the whole front, and he was on that porch when we came up the walk. And he watched the 3 of us come with the look of a man watching an odd little parade that had wandered onto his lawn. I handed him the notice. I said, "I'd like you to read this, Mr. Rennick. These men are witnesses that I've given it to you." He unfolded it. He read it, I watched his eyes go down the lines, and I watched the corner of his mouth move. And I knew before he opened it what was coming. He laughed. Not a big laugh. A small, private, comfortable laugh. The laugh of a man who has never once been made to answer for anything and cannot picture the day he will be. He folded my notice back up along its creases, neat, and he put it in the inside pocket of his coat. And he patted the pocket. "You go on and mail your seed to the college, Della," he said. "You do that." And he turned and went inside, and the screen door clapped shut behind him. The postmaster looked at the ground. Kessler's jaw was tight. But I wasn't sorry. I was glad. Because he'd taken it. In front of 2 witnesses, he'd taken the warning into his own pocket, and he'd laughed, and he'd walked inside. Whatever came after, no man could ever say August Rennick hadn't been offered the chance to test the seed and set it right. He'd been offered it, holding it in his own hand, and he'd chosen the laugh. I'd made sure of that. I didn't fully know why it would matter. I only knew that a man who ignores a fair warning has no clean way to complain about what the warning warned him of. That paper went into his coat pocket like a small folded thing not worth a thought. It was the thing that hanged him. But that comes later. There was one act left, and it was mine to do, and I did it the same afternoon so there'd be no night to lose my nerve in. I drove the sealed envelope to the depot in Ransom. The train came through at 4:10. I stood on the platform with the envelope in both hands, and I thought about the shape of the whole thing. How a rich man's lie could travel a whole county in an afternoon on nothing but his say-so free. And how the truth had to be sealed and witnessed and paid for and put on a train and sent 200 miles to a laboratory and back, $9.21 just to catch up. The lie rode for nothing. The truth I had to buy a ticket for. I bought the ticket. I handed the clerk the envelope and the $9, and I watched him weigh it and stamp it and toss it in the sack with the rest, and then the 410 came in loud and hot and took the sack aboard and pulled out east, and I stood there until I couldn't see the smoke. That was the middle of it, though I didn't have a word for middle. That was the moment I stopped being a woman something was being done to and became a woman doing something back. It didn't feel grand. It felt like standing on a platform watching a train get small. But from that afternoon on, I never said another word to another living soul about smut or slander or August Rennick. I'd said all I had to say. I'd said it to the state of Kansas, sealed under two men's names, and now there was nothing to do but go home and farm and wait for the state to answer. 21 days. The note was due in 26. I did the arithmetic on the platform, watching the smoke thin out over the wheat. 21 to hear, 26 to pay. 5 days of daylight between the answer coming and the debt falling due. 5 days to take a piece of state paper and turn it back into $1.90 a bushel and $940 and the keys to my own ground. If the answer came on time. If it said what I knew it would say. If 5 days was enough to unbury a name that one sentence had buried in an afternoon. I drove home in the long gold light with the wagon empty and my hands quiet on the reins, and I felt, for the first time since the Grange Hall, like a woman standing on her own 2 feet. I didn't know yet that August Rennick wasn't a man who waited on the calendar. I didn't know that while my envelope rode east on the 410, he was already counting the same days I was, and doing his own arithmetic and not liking the answer. I didn't know he had a way to move the note. I didn't know that in a little while a paper of his own was going to get nailed to the door of the Ransom Grange Hall and that it would be dated inside my 21 days on purpose to beat my train. All I knew, driving home in that gold light, was that the truth was finally on the move. I just didn't know yet whose train would get there first. The first week I did nothing but farm. That sounds small. It wasn't. It was the hardest thing I did in the whole business. A body wants to move when it's wronged. It wants to knock on doors and set people straight. I had a sealed envelope somewhere east of me on a rail, carrying my whole life in a fold of brown paper. And all I could do was hoe my rows and wait on a laboratory I had never seen. So I farmed. I got up when the sky went gray. I fed the stock. I walked my bottomland in the cool of the morning when the spring still ran clear and cold at the low corner of the place. The one water that never quit even in that killing summer. Emmett used to say the spring was the reason he bought the ground. Not the acres. The water. Everything else in Cottonwood County was blowing off to Oklahoma by then, but my low corner stayed green, and the wheat I had bred with that man for 12 years stood up in it like it hadn't heard the news. Nobody came to buy. That was the quiet part nobody warns you about. It wasn't loud. Rennick's word had done its work at the seed market, and now the work just sat there, heavy, in the shape of an empty lane and a telephone that didn't ring. Folks I'd known for years crossed to the far side of the street in Ransom. Not out of meanness, out of embarrassment. They didn't know what to say to a woman whose seed had been called dirty in front of 41 men. So they said nothing, and their nothing was its own kind of noise. I let it be noise. I'd said all I was going to say to anyone but the state of Kansas. Ruth couldn't stand it. She was 16 that summer, and 16 is an age with no patience in it. She'd come in from town with her jaw set and her eyes bright, and she'd stand in the kitchen door while I worked. "They're saying it again, Mama, at the store. Old man Pruitt told the Larsons our wheat's got smut all through it. He said it like it was gospel. Let him. Let him." She said it back to me like a curse. "You keep saying that. Let him. Let him. When do we stop letting him?" I set down the bowl I was drying. I looked at my girl, and I saw her father's temper in her, that quick hot thing he spent his whole life learning to bank down. "We stop," I said, "when the state answers. Not before. If I go to town and call August Rennick a liar, I'm just one more voice in a fight. And in this county his voice is louder than mine. I can't outshout him, Ruth. I never could. So I'm not going to try. Then he wins." "No," I said. "Then he waits. Same as me. She didn't believe me. I could see it. She thought her mother had gone soft, gone quiet, gone down without a swing. She looked at my calm and she read surrender in it, the way young people do, because they haven't learned yet that the stillest water is the deepest. I didn't blame her. There were nights I wasn't sure myself. The seed tin sat on the shelf over the stove where it always had. Emmett's tin, hand-soldered, his own tag penciled on the side in his square careful hand. Hargrove TR, keep, foundation stock. The mother seed of everything I'd tried to sell. I'd taken my sealed sample straight out of that tin, with 2 men watching. Now the tin just sat there, catching the lamplight of an evening, and some nights I'd look at it and feel like the man himself was in the room. 1 lung and all, telling me to hold steady. Hold steady. 21 days. On the 9th day, the Crolls almost went under. They farmed the half-section north of me, Ansel and Marta Kroll and their 4 children, and they were as broke gets. The drought had taken their corn to nothing. Their own seed wheat was thin, and half of it wouldn't come up. And into that fear rode August Rennick, the way he always did, at the exact worst hour a family could have him. I heard it from Marta at the well. Rennick had offered to take their acres off their hands, $7 an acre, cash, that day. And he'd leaned down off his good horse and told Ansel, kind as poison, that a man ought to sell before his neighbors dragged him down. That the Hargrove place was finished. That the smut would spread to any ground that traded with me. He said, "Your wheat's cursed, Della." Marta wouldn't look at me when she said it. He said it'll ruin us to plant near it. I stood at that well a long minute. Everything in me wanted to tell her the truth. That the sample was gone east. That the state would clear it. That in 12 days or 10 or 8 I'd have a paper that turned Rennick's word to smoke. But I'd made myself a rule on the train platform, and the rule was I would not go around telling my side and begging to be believed. If I did that, I was just trading rumor for rumor, and the whole county could sort out which liar to trust. So I didn't defend myself. I did something else. "Marta," I said, "how much good seed do you have?" "Not enough. Not near." "You'll plant my wheat then, the clean lot. I've got 500 bushels sitting in the crib doing nobody any good. Take what you need. Pay me at harvest, out of the crop, or don't pay me at all if the crop fails." She stared at me. "That's the seed he says is, I know what he says." I kept my voice flat and easy. "I'm telling you to put it in your ground and watch it come up. That's all the argument I've got. Watch it come up." They planted my wheat, not because I'd won a fight, because I'd handed them a wagon load of seed in a season of time, and that was a thing a body could hold in her 2 hands when words had gone cheap. Ansel Kroll didn't sell his acres to August Rennick. And Rennick, riding home empty-handed, learned that a widow with no voice had reached out and pulled a family back off the ledge without saying one word against him. That's when I think he stopped being patient. Ruth heard about the Krolls and came at me a different way. Not angry now. Cunning. I found something out, she said. Lo, the way you tell a secret. Rennick's north sections. The big ones off the Ellsworth Road. They came up thin, Mama, his own hired man told the Peterson boy. Half of it never sprouted, and what did come up has got something wrong with it. Spots on the leaves. She leaned in. We could tell people. Just tell it the way he told his. Get it around the store, the elevator. See how he likes it. His seed's the sick one. Not ours. Lord, it was tempting. I'll tell you true, it sat in my chest sweet as anything for about 3 seconds. To do to him the exact thing he'd done to me. To watch his price crater at his own market. To let his neighbors cross the street from him. It would have been so easy. And it would have been, near as I could tell, actually true. No, I said. Mama, no, Ruth, listen to me and hear it. Because I'm only going to say it the once. I took both her hands. If we win by whispering, then whispering won. And whispering is the thing that near ruined us. I'm not going to pick up his weapon just because it's lying there. We win clean or we don't win at all. You understand me? Clean or not at all. She pulled her hands back. She didn't understand, but she didn't say it again either, and that was something. I have wondered since if I was right. If pride was doing my thinking for me. But I'll tell you what I've decided in the years after. A thing you win dirty, you have to keep winning dirty to hold. A thing you win clean stays won. I wanted the kind of clear that a body could set down and never pick up again. I wanted it in writing, over a state seal, where no man's voice could reach it. I just had to live long enough in the waiting to get there. On the 14th day, August Rennick moved. I didn't see it happen. I heard the wagon before I saw it, coming fast down my lane, and it was the Kroll boy, red-faced, half off the seat before it stopped. Ms. Hargrove. They put a paper on the grange door. On your ground. I dried my hands. I did not run. I want you to know I did not run, though everything in me wanted to. I put on my good bonnet and I hitched the wagon myself, slow, and I drove into Ransom sitting straight. Because I had learned that summer that the walk-in matters as much as the thing you're walking to. The paper was nailed to the Grange Hall door where the whole town would pass it. It was a foreclosure notice, and under it, an auction handbill. August Rennick had bought my note. I stood and read it twice in the heat. The Cottonwood Farmers and Merchants Bank had sold my $940 note, my paper, Emmett's paper, our life's paper, to August Rennick, private party. And Rennick, holding it now, had called it. Not in 26 days. Not on the due date Doss had read me so firm across his desk. He'd called it early, payable in 8 days. And when I couldn't pay in 8 days because no living soul could, my 160 acres of spring-fed bottomland, the water, the wheat, the house, the low green corner Emmett bought for the spring that never quit, would go to auction on the Grange Hall floor. 8 days. My sample wasn't due back for another 7 at the soonest. The turnaround was 21 days and I was on day 14. Even if the state answered to the very hour it had promised, the paper would come home to a farm that had already been sold out from under it. He'd beaten my train. That was the whole of it, standing there nailed to a door. He'd done his own arithmetic, same as I'd done mine on the platform, and he'd found the 5 days I was counting on, and he'd reached in and taken them. He couldn't stop my envelope. So he'd moved the finish line. I read Halbert Doss's signature at the bottom, small and neat, the banksman doing the bank's dirty work, selling a widow's note to the one man in the county who wanted her ruined. And I thought, standing there, he signed it. Whatever comes, Doss signed his name to it, in ink, where it can be read. I didn't tear the paper down. I left it hanging. Let the town read it. Let them read the date on it, too, because I noticed the date. He dated the call inside my 21 days on purpose. A man doesn't do a thing by accident and put a date on it. He'd told the whole county, in writing, that he was in a hurry. I filed that away. A man in a hurry has a reason to be, and reasons leave marks. I drove home. Ruth was waiting on the porch, and she'd heard, and for once she didn't say a word. She just looked at me with her father's frightened eyes, and I put my arm around her. And we stood and watched the light go long over the wheat that was supposedly cursed and was in fact the greenest thing for 3 counties. 5 days, Ruth whispered. We needed 5 days between, and he took them. He took the days, I said. He didn't take the paper. The paper's still coming. It'll come too late. Maybe I watched the sun sit down in the dust. And maybe a laboratory keeps its own calendar and doesn't care what August Rennick nails to a door. I didn't believe it as strong as I said it. But I said it strong for her. Sometimes that's a mother's whole job. To say the strong thing while your own knees are water so the child has something level to stand on. The certificate came on the 19th day. Warren Kessler brought it himself. He didn't wait for the mail carrier. He drove out from the county office with his hat in his hand and an envelope held flat against his chest like it might blow away, and when I saw his face coming up the lane I knew before he was out of the car. "It's back," he said. "Mrs. Hargrove. It's back, and I didn't open it. It's yours to open, but the postmaster and I logged it in, and it's sealed the way it left, chain unbroken. He was young and earnest, and he'd done every small thing right, and God bless him for it, because it was those small right things that were about to save my life." My hands shook. I won't pretend they didn't. I sat down at Emmett's table, under Emmett's tin, and I opened the envelope from the State Seed Laboratory of the Agricultural College, signed at the bottom by a man I never met named Eldon Rourke. I read it out loud, because Ruth was there, and Kessler, and because some things you have to hear in a voice to believe. Sample submitted by Della Hargrove, Ransom, Cottonwood County. Hargrove turkey red winter wheat. Germination, 99%. My voice caught. I made it go on. Purity, 99 4/10%. Smut spores detected, none. I set the paper down flat. None. 0. Certified clean. Over the seal of the state of Kansas. The kitchen was so quiet, I could hear the spring running down at the low corner. Clean, it had never been blighted. Not one day, not one grain. The word that had killed my sale in an afternoon. The word Rennick had breathed into Tom Aldis's ear at the elevator before a single sack was ever opened. It was a lie. And now I had the lie's own contradiction in my 2 hands. Printed and sealed by an office that outranked every dollar August Rennick owned. Half of Cottonwood County couldn't buy what that paper said. Only the wheat itself could earn it. And it had. Ruth started to cry. Not the angry crying she'd done all summer. The other kind. "We tell them," she said. "We tell everyone, tonight." "No." I folded the certificate along its creases. "Careful. We don't tell them one at a time in the street. We tell them all at once. In the same room where he killed it. On the same floor, before the same men." Kessler understood before Ruth did. "The auction," he said quietly. "It's in 3 days. In the Grange Hall." 41 of them stood there and watched my price die, I said. "Let the same 41 stand there and watch it come back to life." "Mr. Kessler, will you read this out loud in that hall?" "Not me. You drew the sample and you sealed it, and you're the county's own agent. It'll carry more from your hand than mine." He straightened up like a man being handed a flag. "I will. We had the paper." But the paper wasn't the whole of it, and I knew that too. Because in those 3 days Rennick did the only thing left to him. He went around the county ahead of me, telling everyone who'd listen that the certificate was nothing. A college boy's guess. A piece of paper a widow could have bought or begged from some young clerk. "Anybody can mail off a good handful and mail back a bad one," he told them at the store, loud, so it carried. "You think a state seal outranks a man who's farmed this county 40 years? It's ink. It's just ink." And I understood the real fight then. It was never about whether the seed was clean. The seed was clean, sealed, certified, done. The fight was whether a state document could beat a land baron's word inside his own county, in front of men who had feared him and borrowed from him and tipped their hats to him their whole lives. He was betting they'd trust the man they knew over the office they didn't. I was betting they were tired of being afraid of him. Auction day, the Ransom Grange Hall was packed to the walls. They'd come for a show. I knew that. Some come to watch a widow lose her farm the way folks slow down for a wreck. Some come out of shame, to stand witness to a thing they couldn't stop. And some, I think, came because they'd planted my wheat or seen it come up green in the Kroll ground, and they wanted to see how the story ended. Whatever brought them, they filled the same hall where my sale had died, and near as I could count, it was the same faces. The same 41, and then some. August Rennick sat up front like a man at his own coronation. Halbert Doss beside him with the note in a leather folder. Coy Pruitt against the wall, the buyer who'd dropped my clean wheat in the dirt, come to see the land he'd helped clear the way for. The auctioneer stood up to open the bidding on the northeast quarter of the Hargrove place. And Warren Kessler stood up first. "Before you start," he said, and his young voice cracked once and then held. "I've got an official finding to read into this room. As county agent, and every man here is going to want to hear it before he lifts a hand to bid." Rennick waved him off. "Easy. Sit down, son. This is a sale, not a schoolhouse." But the room had gone still, and a still room doesn't sit a man down. Kessler lifted the certificate. "The State Seed Laboratory," he read, "at the Agricultural College. Sample drawn by me, sealed under my hand and the postmaster's, from the Hargrove Foundation stock. I'll read you what the state of Kansas found." He looked up once, and then he read it slow, so every word landed. Germination, 99%. Purity, 99 4/10%. Smut spores detected, none. Somebody in the back said out loud, "None?" "None," Kessler said. "The state of Kansas doesn't trade in a man's word. It trades in a sealed sample. And the sealed sample says 0 smut. 99% clean. This wheat isn't dirty. It never was. Somebody in this county said it was, and the state just called that somebody a liar in writing over its own seal. I have thought about that moment more than any other in my life. Because it didn't come with shouting. It came with a rustle. The rustle of 41 men opening their books again. The little dry sound of pages I'd heard close against me in that same room turned around and running the other way. A buyer near the front, one who'd walked out on me in the spring, stood up and said, "If that's certified clean, I'll take 50 bushels at $1.90, and I'll take it before this land sells, because I'd rather have the seed than the ground." $1.90. The auctioneer blinked. $1.90, that's the price of clean certified seed and always was. The man looked straight at Rennick. Or is somebody going to tell me the state of Kansas can't read? And then it was a rush. The Krolls came up first, Ansel with his hat crushed in his hand, saying he'd take 100 bushels on the same terms as before and pay it proud. Then the Larsons, who'd believed Pruitt at the store not a week gone. Then men I'd known Emmett's whole life. They crowded the table where I sat with the certificate, and they weren't buying land at auction anymore. They were buying seed from me at $1.90 a bushel, and the orders ran past my 500 bushels before the auctioneer ever brought down a hammer. There was no auction. You can't auction a farm out from under a woman who's just sold her whole crop at full price in the middle of the floor. The note was $940. I'd cleared better than $950 in 20 minutes, standing still, saying almost nothing, letting a piece of state paper do the talking I'd refused to do all summer. But I wasn't done. Clean means all the way clean, and there were 3 men in that room who'd earned a word. Rennick first. He was on his feet by then, and the old red was up in his face. "This proves nothing," he started. "A sample, sealed, mailed, how do we know?" That was when Tom Aldous stood up. Tom was the elevator man, a quiet fellow who measured other men's grain all day and kept his own counsel. I hadn't asked him to come. He'd come on his own. I'll tell you what I know, August. Tom's voice was slow, and it filled the hall the way a slow voice does. Back in the spring. Before the seed market. Before one sack of hers was ever opened for anybody to look at. You stood at my scale, and you told Coy Pruitt, lo, that he ought to steer wide of the Hargrove seed. Said it carried the smut. I heard you. You said it before there was a thing to see. A man doesn't warn about a sickness before the patient's been looked at, not unless he's the one wrote the diagnosis. The room turned. You could feel it turn, like a field of wheat when the wind shifts. I stood up then. I had one more thing, and I'd carried it 3 days for this. I laid it on the table where the light hit it. The written notice. The one I'd served him back before I mailed the sample, the demand that he retract. The invitation to test the seed himself, witnessed by Kessler and the postmaster. Dated in my own hand. You'll remember this, Mr. Rennick, I said. Quiet. I didn't raise my voice 1 inch. I gave it to you in front of 2 men. Asked you to test the seed yourself. Asked you to take back what you said if you were wrong. You laughed. You folded it into your coat pocket. You've had it all this time. You could have answered it any day. You never did. I looked at him, and I found I wasn't afraid of him anymore. That was the strangest thing. All summer I'd been afraid, and now I looked at August Rennick across a table and there just wasn't any fear left in the drawer. There's your word, dated, I said. And there's the state's word, dated. They're both in this room. The county can read them side by side. He had one line left. It was the old one. He drew himself up and he said, in Cottonwood County, my word is the market. And it died in the room. Nobody moved to back him. Nobody said amen. The men who'd feared him a season ago stood there with their order books open in their hands, and his sentence just fell on the floor and lay there. His word had been the market right up until the state of Kansas printed a different market and mailed it to me for $9. He looked around for the fear he was used to leaning on, and it was gone. And a man like that, with the fear gone, is just an old man in a good coat. Doss was next, and Doss was easier, because Doss had signed his name. The bank had 2 board members in that hall besides Doss himself. They'd come to watch the auction, and they'd gotten a certificate and a sworn account of slander instead, and now they were doing the fast, quiet arithmetic that bankers do when the wind changes. Halbert, one of them said, you sold this woman's note to a private party. To him, a nod at Rennick, inside the term. Called it early. On what grounds? Doss opened his mouth. He looked at Rennick, and Rennick wasn't looking back at him, because Rennick had already started saving himself the way that kind does when the ship goes down. And Doss, with nobody to look at, couldn't find a word. There wasn't one. He'd sold a good note on a certified clean crop to help ruin the woman who owed it, and now the crop was certified clean in front of the whole county, and there was no story he could tell that made his signature look like anything but what it was. He never did explain himself. By the end of that week, the bank had voided Rennick's early call, taken my $950, marked the note paid, and handed me back the deed to my own ground. And before the month was out, August Rennick was off the board of the Cottonwood Farmers and Merchants Bank, because a bank can't sit a man at its table who used its paper to run a slander, not once the whole county's watched it happen. Doss kept his job a little longer than Rennick kept his seat. Not much longer. Pruitt was last, and Pruitt was the one that satisfied Ruth most, I think. Because Coy Pruitt, the buyer who'd rolled my clean head of wheat between his fingers and dropped it in the dirt to please a rich man, Coy Pruitt had contracts of his own to fill that fall, and he needed certified seed to fill them, and there was exactly 1 certified clean lot of turkey red in 3 counties. Mine, he came to the table after the crowd thinned. He'd lost the swagger. He turned his hat in his hands. Della, he said, I'll want some seed. For my contracts. Certified, like the paper says. He couldn't quite meet my eye. Whatever the price is. I looked at him a good while. You can have a bushel, I said. One, at 24 cents. His head came up. 24, that's the price you set for it, Coy, in the spring. You stood in this hall and you said my seed was feed grain and you dropped it in the dirt, and 24 cents is what you tried to give me. So you can have one bushel at your own price. Clean, I let it sit. Like you said it wasn't. He took the bushel. One bushel, at 24 cents. And not a grain more would I sell him that day. The rest of the county paid $1.90. Coy Pruitt paid 24 cents for the privilege of being reminded, and he carried it out to his truck in front of everybody, and I never had a lick of trouble from him again. I'd like to tell you Rennick left it there. He didn't. His kind never does, right up until the ground itself takes the argument out of their hands. That fall, his own wheat told on him. His big north sections off the Ellsworth Road, the ones Ruth had wanted me to gossip about, he'd sown them thick with uncertified bin-run seed, his own saved grain, because a man who'd spent his life bullying the seed trade never imagined he'd need to buy clean seed like an ordinary farmer. And that bin-run came up exactly the way he'd lied about mine. Thin, patchy, and smutted. Actually smutted. The real thing. The black spore he'd only ever accused me of. It ran through his north sections like the judgment it was, and it cost him, and there wasn't a laboratory in Kansas he could mail off to fix it. Because the fault was in the seed, and the seed was his. So in the fall of that year, August Rennick came to my door. I heard the horse, and I knew the horse. I dried my hands, and I went out on the porch, and I did not ask him in. He sat up there in his good coat with the smut on his own acres and his board seat gone and his word worth nothing at the elevator anymore. And he asked me, stiff as a fence post, if I would sell him certified Hargrove Turkey Red to save his standing and his ground. I could have said no. Ruth, in the doorway behind me, wanted me to say no so bad she was near vibrating with it. I'll sell you seed, Mr. Rennick, I said. At the market price. $1.90 a bushel, cash in hand, and no neighbor discount. Because you've never once been a neighbor to me. He swallowed that. He'd have to. And one thing more, I said. In writing. On the bill of sale. In your own hand, you'll write that the seed is clean. Certified Hargrove Turkey Red, clean seed. You'll write the word yourself. He knew what I was doing. I saw him know it. I was making the man who'd killed my sale with the word dirty sit at my table and write the word clean about my seed in his own hand, where it would live in a drawer forever. He looked at me a long moment, and then he did it. Because a man drowning takes the rope even when the rope is a rebuke. He wrote it. Certified Hargrove Turkey Red, clean seed. His hand. His signature under it. I still have that bill of sale. I've got the certificate, and I've got his written notice he pocketed and ignored, and I've got that bill of sale with clean in his own writing. All three in the same drawer. 3 papers. A man's word, dated, the state's word, dated, and the man, at the end, writing the state's word back to me because the ground made him. The auction handbill, the one he'd nailed to the Grange door to beat my train, I put in the stove. I watched it burn. That one I didn't keep. It's 8 months on now as I tell you this, and the wheat is standing. That's the part I wish Emmett had lived to see. It's standing gold, chest high, where the dust used to move across bare ground like water. The spring still runs at the low corner and the whole bottom is green and heavy, and out past it, on the Kroll place and the Larson place, and half the farms in the county, my seed is standing too. Because certified Hargrove Turkey Red ships to 3 counties now, every sack with Emmett's own tag stamped on the side. 12 years that man spent breeding a wheat that would hold its feet when everything else blew away. He got one lung out of the war and that one gift, and the gift outlived the war and outlived the man and outlived the lie. And there it stands, gold in the evening. I sat on the porch tonight with my coffee going cold and watched the light lie down on it. Of August Rennick I'll say only this. He learned that the state can read, even in a county where he'd counted on nobody bothering to. He still owns his acres. He owns a good deal less of the county's respect. He buys certified seed now, like an honest man, because the ground made an honest man of him whether he wanted the job or not. Halbert Doss, the bank found a new cashier for. And Coy Pruitt, well, he buys clean seed now, and he pays full price for it, and when he takes a head of wheat between his fingers these days, I notice he sets it down gentle. Ruth is 17 now. She understands the quiet better than she did. She saw how it went, how a woman who never raised her voice took her farm back from the loudest man in 3 counties without ever once whispering a lie of her own. The seed tin, Emmett's hand-soldered tin with his penciled tag, it sits on Ruth's shelf now, in her room. I gave it to her. The foundation stock is hers to keep going when I'm gone, and she keeps it like the treasure it is, because she knows now what it cost and what it held. I think about that summer a great deal. About the afternoon in the Grange Hall when one sentence made my dead husband's seed worthless, and I picked the wheat up out of the dirt and said nothing, and everybody thought that nothing was surrender. It wasn't surrender. It was a woman reading the fine print. A rumor is only fast. That's all it ever is. It's fast, and it's loud, and it gets there first, and for a while it wins because nobody's answered it yet. But it can't hold its ground against a thing that's certified. The truth is slower. The truth has to ride the 410 train and wait on a laboratory and come home over a seal. But when it comes home for keeps, and no man's word, however much county he owns, can drop it in the dirt. So that's the story of how a widow's wheat traveled farther than a rich man's word. If you've listened this far, I'd take it kindly if you'd comment the town you're watching from. I've a mind to see just how far a widow's clean seed can go, and how many good quiet people out there still read the fine print.